everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Switch gears, and I do want to talk about a place that we have talked about quite a bit here over the last couple weeks, and that is College Station, Texas, and the Texas A&M Aggies. And obviously, if you listen to this channel, or frankly, if you just like college football, you know that it has been a tumultuous few weeks at Texas A&M, as we first talked about Jimbo Fisher's firing, and then obviously the coaching search that followed it. Now, the search ended up resulting in Mike Elko being the next head coach. I thought it was the right hire. But one thing I said during that time, during that search, I said the single most important thing for the next Texas A&M head coach. I said it at the time, and I truly believed it. Listen, you don't want to be beholden to any one player or one class or one whatever. But what I said at the time was the next Texas A&M head coach can't just have the 5-year plan of this is where we want to be after a year or two, couple classes, whatever. I said at Texas A&M, the most important thing the next head coach has to have is the 5-week plan. And the reason that I said that was pretty straightforward, right? It was because when most coaches take over a new situation as a head coach, it's a complete rebuild. You got to tear the thing down and build it back up. It's what Hugh Freeze had to do last year. It's what Deion Sanders had to do last year. You can like Deion or hate him, but he took over a 1-11 team, had to tear that sucker down and build it back up. You can disagree or agree with how he's doing it, but that was what he had to do. Same with Brian Kelly a few years ago at LSU. The list goes on and on and on. And so I bring it up because I said Texas A&M is the rare place. That is not the case at all for the Aggies. Texas A&M actually has one of the most talented rosters in college football. That's the reason they paid Jimbo Fisher $77 million to go away. It was because they had so much talent and they were so underachieving that they couldn't stand the possibility of bringing him back for another year. But when you hired the new head coach, the single most important thing, in my opinion, was the first few weeks on the job, trying to do whatever you could to retain the roster that's currently on campus. Because unlike what Hugh Freeze inherited, unlike what Deion Sanders inherited, Brian Kelly, whoever, you have a roster that, in theory, if it clicks in year one in a 12-team playoff era, you could actually make the college football playoff. And so I bring it up because that's all I cared about with the hire. What are you going to do over these first few weeks? And let me say this. I truly believe Mike Elko is the guy. He was the guy that I would have gone after. He was the guy that I thought of the realistic candidates, he was the guy that I thought, okay, that's the one that you want to go get. But at the same time, Texas A&M has lost one key important player after another to the portal over the last couple days. It is not pretty. And right now, that Mike Elko 5-week plan is not looking very good. Now, listen, I don't want to overreact. And I know that everybody loses players to the portal, okay? But at the same time, the volume, but more specifically, it's not the quantity of players. It's the quality of players that Texas A&M is losing. And specifically, 5 players from about 5 p.m. on Tuesday evening till about 3 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon. In that 24-hour period, they lost 5 marquee players. The first one late Tuesday night, LT Overton was the first guy to really enter the portal, officially, by the way. Big guy, defensive lineman, was part of that 2022 class. Really interesting story. He was actually a member of the class of 2023, reclassifies, ends up getting to Texas A&M 2 summers ago, had a pretty good freshman year in 2022, in the fall of 2022, finished that season with 3 tackles for loss and 1 sack. This year, he still had a decent season, 17 tackles, 11 games appeared in, but certainly didn't have the season that many expected. But you know what? It's a deep rotation, whatever. The guy is a really, really, really good player. And on Tuesday night, he was the first really big name to announce that he's entering the portal. By the way, Max Johnson entered like 2 weeks ago. I don't even count Max Johnson, whatever. He wasn't going to start next year, whatever. But LT Overton was the first big one. Then on Wednesday morning, we wake up to the news that Jake Johnson, Max Johnson's brother, has also entered the portal. He was basically the best tight end on the roster this year. And the one thing I will say, while I was a critic of Max Johnson, I think Jake Johnson's a baller. 24 catches, 4 touchdowns. He's big, but he's athletic. He's quick. He's got good hands. Kind of, he can make plays in the air. Really talented player. Not much of a fan of his brother as a quarterback, but he, of course, did decide to enter the portal. And another one. Don't know that it's that surprising or it's that big of a loss. Once Max left, you kind of got the sense, okay, Jake might not stay. Max committed to UNC. We'll see if Jake follows him. I think at some point those two have to break off. You got to do what's best for you, Jake Johnson. And I think that is a tight end that could play anywhere in college football going forward. Those were the first two. The issue is the last 3 are really where it starts to kind of be a gut punch for the Aggies, okay? One, and this was a big one. Did you see what happened about probably 2:30 Eastern time on Wednesday afternoon? Fadil Diggs, excuse me. I said Fadil Diggs. He was a monster this year. He was a 4th-year guy, so we spent so much time talking about that 2022 recruiting class. He was a year or 2 ahead of them, but this kid was a dog this year along the defensive front for Texas A&M. Finished the year with 11 tackles for loss to go along with 4 sacks. Had about 7.5 sacks or tackles for loss, a year ago. This guy was not only one of the best defensive linemen that Texas A&M had. I would argue he's one of the best defensive linemen in college football this past season for everything that he did. Listen, we can criticize A&M for a lot. That defensive front was monstrous, though, until lose Fadil Diggs. 4th-year guy. He's got a year of eligibility. I think there was a thought that maybe he goes to the NFL draft, but to enter the transfer portal is just crushing. The problem, it got worse from there. Following the Fadil Diggs news. After that, you had Chase Bistanis, starting offensive lineman, freshman this past year. And I know the offensive line wasn't great for A&M, and I know that they needed to be better, all that. But he was a starter. He was a true freshman. He was a high 4-star. He was a guy that you thought you could build around on that offensive line going forward. He, too, enters the portal on Wednesday afternoon. And finally, and this is the big one, we had heard reports as recently as Sunday evening that Walter Nolan, the former #1 high school player in America, could be entering the transfer portal. As a matter of fact, there was a report out on Sunday from Hayes Fawcett that he would be entering the portal. Then the days go on. He hasn't officially entered. You wonder, is he actually going to enter? Or is Mike Elko going to convince him to stay and be an Aggie? Well, Wednesday afternoon, he enters the portal, and he is the big one. He is the one that it's just like, oh my goodness, this is not good news if you're an Aggies fan. As a true sophomore this past year, finished the year, 8 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. Remember, he got hurt in the Tennessee game, wasn't even at full strength for the back half of the year. Had to be taken off on a cart and came back a week later. This guy, I believe, is a top 10 caliber type draft pick. He has now announced he's entering the portal as well. So that is now 5 players who have entered the portal for Texas A&M, 4 of which were essentially starters. I would argue one of the best tight ends I saw in the SEC this year, and 2 of the best defensive linemen in all of college football. And so you look at what happened at A&M, and I'm just here to say it is not pretty. It is not good. And I do think it's okay to worry a little bit if you're an Aggies fan. Now, on the inverse, I know what a lot of A&M fans will say. Oh, Torres, everybody loses people to the portal. This time of year, stuff happens. I get it. I do. The thing is, though, most teams lose back end of the roster players to the portal. Georgia's, I think, 6-7 guys enter the portal since the season ended. I don't know that a single one of them was a guy that Kirby Smart was desperately trying to keep, regardless of their recruiting ranking, etc. Ohio State, I think, has lost 11 total players. If you even include Kyle McCord, who started every game pretty much for them this season, I don't know that Ryan Day lost anybody that he is really worried about losing. But Texas A&M just lost some guys that you really don't want to lose. Now, obviously, the good thing, that 2022 class, it was historic. So many great defensive linemen. If you can retain the rest, you still have a pretty good roster going forward. And obviously, beyond that, it is also worth noting that any player who enters the portal doesn't have to transfer. You can always come back. I think there was that thought with Walter Nolan is he even going to enter? Could he enter and come back? But I just bring it up because this is a tough few days for the Aggies. And bluntly, it's something that you probably could have seen coming. And I go back to when Jimbo Fisher was actually fired. In the lead up to that firing, every week, every loss, there started to be more and more reports that this thing might actually happen. They might pay $77 million to make him go away. And what I said at the time is, look, it's not my money. I don't care. You do whatever you want to do with your money. It's not mine. But at the same time, be very careful, because my thought all along was you keep Jimbo Fisher through the end of 2024 to get to the finish line with this 2022 recruiting class. They will be juniors next year. Many of them will be draft eligible. Many of them will go pro. And the one thing you say is if you keep Jimbo Fisher, most of them probably stay. They stick around, try to finish what they started, all that good stuff. But the second that you fire him, the second that moment of doubt creeps in, I'm going to be playing for somebody who didn't recruit me, be playing for a coaching staff that might not want me. And that is when a lot of people start getting in these players' ears. And listen, I get it. People are getting in their players' ears even before all of this happened. So I'm not saying that like nobody had any kind of, communication before Jimbo Fisher got fired or even when the season ended. But what I said was, this is why you keep Jimbo Fisher around, for the fear that you're going to lose a lot of talent. And that's exactly what's happening. Now, the good thing is, and by the way, this is also why I liked hiring Mike Elko. I said, look, he has a relationship with a lot of these kids. He was the lead recruiter on a lot of these kids before he left for the Duke job a few years ago. But right now, man, you got to stop hemorrhaging players and you got to move forward. So I think this, to me, this is going to be, outside of the playoff, this is the most interesting story to follow in college football over these next couple weeks, and something that you want to follow. You want to be subscribed to this YouTube channel because we're going to be talking a lot about, okay? Because right now, there is so much talent at Texas A&M, and I think Mike Elko has one of the toughest jobs in college football. Jimbo Fisher's got to, Jim Harbaugh's got to figure out how to beat Nick Saban. Steve Sarkisian's got to figure out how to beat Kalen DeBoer and vice versa. Mike Elko has a potential national championship caliber roster sitting in his facility right now, and he's got to figure out how to keep these kids on campus. We'll see what happened. As I said, one, everybody loses players. If this is the totality of what you lose, it's not the worst thing that's ever happened. Still have a lot of talent in that building. And again, those players do still have the option to come back. So it's not as though just because they're leaving, they'll never be back in the facility again. But this is something to watch. This is something to keep an eye on. And I would be worried if I was an A&M fan, because this is why you hired Mike Elko. He has the relationship. So keep the building intact. So far, not so good. The good news is there's plenty of time for him to get things figured out. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. New episodes of the Aaron Torres Pod every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Also, bonus clips like this. A lot of college football, a lot of college hoops. Subscribe, like, share the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel.